Have you ever felt invisible at work? Like you have brilliant ideas, but the words just get stuck in your throat. That was me. For years, I was the office ghost, the quiet one in the corner, the person everyone talked over in meetings. My name is Maya, and this is the story of how I went from being a timid employee to leaving an entire boardroom speechless. It all started in a typical soul-crushing corporate environment. You know the type. Fluorescent lights, the constant hum of computers, and meetings that could have been emails. I was a junior analyst, good at my job, but terrified of speaking up. My boss, Mr. Henderson, was a classic alpha male type. He didn't mean to be intimidating, but his booming voice and time is money attitude made my throat close up every time I even thought about contributing. I remember one specific meeting. We were brainstorming a new marketing campaign. I had an idea, something I'd spent weeks researching on my own time. It was different, a bit risky, but I knew it had potential. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. My palms were sweaty. I opened my mouth to speak, but one of the senior managers, Mark, cut in with a joke, and the moment was gone, just like that. My idea stayed locked away, and I felt that familiar sting of disappointment. I just shrank back into my chair, making myself smaller and smaller. This happened time and time again. I'd prepare, I'd rehearse in front of my mirror, I'd give myself a pep talk, but in the heat of the moment, my voice would abandon me. I watched as my colleagues, the louder ones, got promotions and praise for ideas that were, frankly, not as good as mine. It was frustrating. I started to believe the narrative I was telling myself, that my ideas weren't worthy, that I didn't belong in that room, that I was just not good enough. The turning point wasn't some dramatic movie moment. It was a small, quiet conversation with a colleague, Sarah, from another department. She was a few years older than me and had this calm, confident energy. One day in the break room, she noticed I was looking downcast after another meeting where I'd been a silent observer. She asked me, "Maya, you always look like you have something to say. Why don't you?" I mumbled something about being shy, about not wanting to interrupt. Sarah just smiled gently and said something that changed everything for me. She said, "Maya, your silence isn't politeness. It's a disservice. It's a disservice to the company, who is missing out on your ideas. But most importantly, it's a disservice to yourself. You're robbing yourself of your own growth. A disservice to myself." Those words echoed in my head for days. She was right. I was so focused on what others might think that I never considered what I was doing to my own career and my own self-worth. I wasn't being polite. I was self-sabotaging. That conversation lit a tiny spark. I decided I needed a strategy. It wasn't about magically becoming an extrovert overnight. It was about taking small, manageable steps. I started by practicing in lower stakes situations. I'd make a point to ask one question in a smaller team huddle. Just one. My voice would shake, but I did it. The world didn't end. No one laughed. In fact, people answered my question thoughtfully. Then, I moved on to stating a simple opinion. I agree with that point, and I think we could also consider this. It was terrifying, but with each small victory, my confidence grew. I realized that people weren't judging me as harshly as I was judging myself. They were just busy with their own thoughts. I also started preparing differently for big meetings. Instead of just having a vague idea, I wrote down my key points, word for word. I'd have a script. If I got nervous, I could look down and read it. It was my safety net. I also identified an ally in the room, like Sarah, someone I could make eye contact with for a bit of moral support. The big day came a few months later. The company was facing a major crisis. Our biggest client was unhappy and threatening to leave, which would mean massive revenue loss and potential layoffs. An emergency, all-hands-on-deck meeting was called in the main boardroom. The atmosphere was thick with panic. Mr. Henderson was pacing, his face grim. Everyone was throwing out the same old, tired solutions. Let's offer them a discount. Let's promise them more resources. And there I was, in the corner, with that familiar heart-pounding sensation. But this time, something was different. I had a solution. It was the idea I'd had months ago, the one I'd been too scared to share. But I had since developed it into a full-fledged, data-backed proposal. It was a complete pivot in our service strategy for this client. It was bold, it was risky. And it was exactly what we needed. I took a deep breath, clutching the notes in my lap. I waited for a brief pause in the panicked chatter. And then, I did it. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was a little shaky, but it was clear. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at me, the office ghost. They looked surprised, as if the chair itself had spoken. "I have an idea," I continued, my voice getting stronger with every word. I stood up, walked to the front of the room, and laid out my plan. I didn't just share the idea. I presented the research, the data, the projected outcomes, the potential risks, and the mitigation strategies. I had done my homework. I wasn't just a timid employee with a thought. I was an expert with a solution. For 10 minutes, I had the entire room's undivided attention. I made eye contact with Mr. Henderson, with Mark, with everyone. I spoke with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. When I finished, the silence was deafening. It wasn't the awkward silence of confusion. It was the silence of stunned respect. Mr. Henderson was the first to speak. He just stared at me for a moment and said, "Maya, ... That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. Why haven't we heard this before?" And in that moment, I wasn't the timid employee anymore. I was a leader. We implemented my strategy, and not only did we save the client, but we also strengthened the relationship to a level we'd never had before. That day changed the entire trajectory of my career, but more importantly, it changed how I saw myself. Finding your voice isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about believing that what you have to say matters. It's about preparation, practice, and taking that first, terrifying step. If you feel invisible at work, please know that your voice has power. Start small, find an ally, do your homework, and remember what Sarah told me. Your silence is a disservice to yourself. You owe it to yourself to be heard. Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. I'd love to hear about your own experiences in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going.